Hi, it's Katrina! The Antarctic icefish. The Antarctic icefish is one of the strangest creatures not only in Antarctica, but anywhere on our planet. It has no red blood cells or hemoglobin, which makes its blood practically translucent. Instead of being red, its blood is colorless, and the scaleless and pale fish is white in some areas and see-through in others. The icefish is the only vertebrate in the world that doesn't have red blood cells. Instead, it has translucent blood and a white heart. At first, biologists thought that its blood had adapted to the freezing, oxygen-rich waters of Antarctica. Maybe they absorbed so much oxygen through their gills and super thin skin that they didn't need big red blood cells. However, it looks like the loss of hemoglobin wasn't a great adaptation, but instead a genetic accident. Icefish blood can only transport 10% as much oxygen as other fish blood, so the icefish has changed its body dramatically in order to survive. Professor of Marine and Environmental Sciences H. William Dietrich says that icefish evolved about 77 million years ago and moved into the cold regions of the Southern Ocean. As the fish adapted genes that protected it from being frozen to death, these same anti-freezing proteins somehow changed the fish's genetic structure. It became able to utilize the high concentration of oxygen in the Antarctic waters instead of relying on silly, outdated red blood cells. These fish are helpful in the study of anemia, as some of their genes relate to some human genes. Icefish were also used as a model for investigating osteoporosis. While they may not have hemoglobin, they are still extremely resilient fish. Translucent mud blob. 10,000 feet beneath the ice, scientists in Antarctica made a shocking discovery. It was in the Southern Ocean on the research vessel the RV Tangaroa that an international team of researchers scanned the seabed using state-of-the-art technology to capture images of the abyssal plain, an area of the ocean about as deep as the Swiss Alps are high. It's an area without a lot of life, but scientists were keen to see what they could find anyway. So they used special equipment to trawl the bottom of the sea here. That means they basically took a net and dragged it along the sea floor at a depth of 10,000 feet. It took about 6 hours to complete the sweep, at which point the scientists got their reward. They had managed to scoop up 10 buckets of mud and a single fish. The fish was actually more of a blob. It was a mucky, gooey, translucent mud blob. It probably looked very different in its home environment under so much pressure, but up on the surface, it was a mere shadow of its real self. According to marine biologist Corinne Schnabel with the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research in New Zealand, the creature is completely unknown. Nobody knows how many are hiding in the mud at such a depth, or how common the creature might be. Nobody has ever seen anything like it before. As far as the experts can tell, the creature might be some kind of sea cucumber, but it's just impossible to say without more specimens and investigations. The Antarctic hellfish. A horrifying new species of fish may have just been found in Antarctica by scientists who were attempting to explore the depths of the frozen continent. Expedition Antarctica was a mission to find the weirdest marine life on the planet, and it was 100% successful. Scientist Andrew Stewart was in charge of the mission, and with his help they found a whole heap of weird creatures living in the icy waters. One of the fish discovered was unlike anything scientists had seen before, looking like some kind of small fish from hell. It was pink, gooey, and very slimy with enormous eyes and a little tongue sticking out. Stewart says that's why I came to Antarctica, to see things like this. At first, nobody could figure out what this Antarctic fish was. After a bit of research, they deemed it to be a type of snailfish, a creature that looks a lot like a tadpole and that only lives in the coldest parts of the Arctic and Antarctic oceans. They live about 2,100 feet beneath the surface. There are also about 400 different types of them with an unknown number still unidentified. As a side note, snailfish have been spotted deep inside the cavernous Mariana Trench in the Pacific Ocean as well, in the darkest and coldest waters. As for the creepy hellfish found by Andrew Stewart, it hasn't been confirmed as a new species yet, but it just might be soon. Would you go on an expedition to Antarctica and brave the cold? How about a cruise? Let me know in the comments below. Antarctic octopus. The Antarctic octopus is another animal with strange blood. It seems there might be many things that live in the frigid waters of Antarctica that have some kind of genetic mutation involving their blood. That level of cold will do things to a living creature. The ice fish may have a white heart, but the Antarctic octopus has blue blood. According to Live Science, the octopus is able to survive in the freezing temperatures because it has a special blue pigment in its blood. The temperatures surrounding Antarctica are somewhere between 28.8 and 35.6 degrees Fahrenheit. It's very hard to transport oxygen through the body in these temperatures. In order to cope, the weird Antarctic octopus uses hemocyanin, a special protein that makes its blood turn blue and keeps its body from freezing. But this little octopus isn't restricted to cold waters. Even when the temperature rises to a warm 50 degrees Fahrenheit, the Antarctic octopus still thrives. Because of its special blood, it has access to far more oxygen than other animals, suggesting it has a better chance of surviving global warming than most of the other fish found in Antarctica. Additionally, this tiny octopus, like many others, is venomous. It has special venom that works even in the freezing temperature, allowing it to hunt and poison creatures no matter how cold it gets. The venom is so unique that there have been recent expeditions to Antarctica just to capture and study more of these octopuses, in the hope of learning more about their special venom and how it can treat medical conditions in the human world. The scale worm. The Antarctic scale worm is the most nightmarish thing living anywhere on the southernmost continent. It's horrible, it stinks, it's ugly, and it has a golden mullet that seems completely out of place. Poor guy. The scale worm can be found at depths of about 1,500 feet, but unlike your garden variety worm, this one is absolutely huge. The massive species can grow to be almost 8 inches long and 4 inches wide, and it has a head that looks like an alien monster, with its body looking as though it's made from human teeth. The scale worm belongs to the family Polynoidae, and these make up a lot of different marine worms. Scientists don't know too much about the scale worm, but they do know that what appears to be its head is actually a proboscis, or what you might call a tubular sucking mouthpiece, like what mosquitoes have. In other words, it's a really ugly straw with sharp teeth that can slurp up prey. The scale worm can turn its proboscis completely inside out and fold it inside its body. Then, when the worm is ready to eat, it unfurls it, rips apart some unsuspecting critter, and slurps up its remains. According to Australian Geographic, these worms are voracious hunters. The comb jelly. The comb jelly is definitely one of the weirder jellyfish that lives in the ocean. It's shaped like an oval, has 8 rows of plates that almost look like combs, and it's strikingly beautiful. It uses its little combs to propel itself through the water like little feet. As it moves, light is diffracted or broken up through its little body to create the effect of a shimmering rainbow. What we have here is a rainbow jellyfish that looks like a head scratcher and is often spotted floating through Antarctic waters. Other than the comb jelly's unique shape and its ability to sparkle like a rainbow, it can also expand its stomach to hold prey at least half its own size. This means the comb jelly can eat as much as it feels like. The comb jelly is just like other jellies in most other ways. It has a few specialized organs, such as the one that allows it to detect chemical traces in the water to better hunt down prey. It also has a special structure called a statocyst, which is sensitive to gravity. It's what allows the jellyfish to keep its orientation while in the water. This is how most jellyfish know where to go and how to get around, considering they don't exactly have eyes to see up and down. The most terrifying fact about the comb jelly is that it's kind of a cannibal. It has been known to attack other comb jellies and slowly eat them alive by biting off small chunks with the special structures inside its mouth, basically nibbling its own kin to death. They are delicate and aggressive all at the same time. For the first time ever, scientists at the Monterey Bay Aquarium have been able to actually raise a spotted comb jelly. Not quite the same as the one in Antarctica, but pretty similar. Most of them in captivity only live for about a day, so successfully being able to culture a species opens the door to sharing more critters and information with other aquariums around the world. Hibernated tusk monster. Scientists at Harvard University have discovered evidence that there was once an animal that lived in Antarctica 250 million years ago during the early Triassic and had one of the best winter survival strategies in the world of animals. The creature was a distant relative of the modern mammal. It was a type of Lystrosaurus, and it had a beak like a turtle and tusks like a warthog. At the time it lived, Antarctica was part of Pangaea but was still part of the Antarctic Circle. It had very long periods without sunlight every winter. The animals that lived on the continent had to deal with going into total darkness for months at a time, so some of them found a way to hibernate. Fossils of a Lystrosaurus found in Antarctica have revealed that it may have been the first mammal-like creature to ever practice hibernation. Researchers looked at a fragmented piece of the animal's tusk. Inside the tusk, researchers found rings, just like how there are rings inside of a tree known as growth rings. But looking beyond the rings, researchers found indications that each year they fell into a hibernation-like state, probably conserving their energy and waiting out the brutal winter. This was revealed by stress markings, which researchers compared to the stress markings on the teeth of modern animals, which they developed around hibernation time. Scientists can't conclusively say whether this prehistoric beast really did snooze through the winter, but it probably did because it was one of the few creatures to survive the Permian period, which wiped out 70% of vertebrate species on land. It went on to live another 5 million years and spread across Pangaea. And now for a really scary beast, but first wanted to give a big shout out to Epic Cat Sneeze and Billy Butcher. Thanks so much for watching and hanging out with us. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button before you leave. The Ningen. There is a creature potentially living in Antarctica that you won't believe. It's a humanoid monster known as a Ningen, and apparently there are a few of them living in the icy waters of Antarctica. The Ningen is white in color, and some claim it's a species of ape that developed the ability to breathe underwater. Ningens have been spotted with mermaid-like tails and hind legs that allow them to scuttle across dry land. If you've never heard of this animal, you're not alone. It's not as famous as the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot, but rumors of Ningens have existed in Japan for years, going back to Japanese fishing vessels that spotted the creatures around the waters of Antarctica. It's believed the Japanese have actually documented the existence of Ningens, though they weren't really brought to public attention until 2007, when they were discussed in a local paranormal magazine. They've been called Antarctic humans, and they've even been captured in pictures thanks to Google Maps. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, not all the pictures taken of the Ningen are credible. For that matter, sightings are few and far between, with people describing the creature as being a human-ape hybrid up to 90 feet long with the skin of a whale. That's obviously too large of a creature to be stomping around on the ice, and it's hard to imagine scientists not discovering a creature bigger than a blue whale swimming around. Mysterious ice creatures. A team of polar scientists with the British Antarctic Survey found a rock on the seafloor teeming with strange, almost extraterrestrial life. The team attached a camera to the end of a long instrument and lowered it into a drill hole. The only way they could reach the ocean floor was to drill the hole through the ice shelf. They lowered the camera all the way through to the bottom and were shocked to discover several previously unknown species. Not only that, but each new species was attached to the same large boulder. They were animals like sea sponges living in total darkness in sub-zero temperatures. Almost no animals have ever been witnessed in such inhospitable conditions. This may not seem super exciting. After all, we're not dealing with new sharks or something visually striking, but this is interesting for scientists because it proves life forms can live pretty much anywhere. These creatures should realistically be frozen and dead, and yet they've attached themselves to rocks and filter feed from other almost microscopic critters moving through the water column. Researchers don't know exactly what the animals are yet, but they are working to find out. Skeletal remains. Someone has discovered the remains of what may be a dinosaur in Antarctica. The discovery was made using Google Maps. A person who has not been identified noticed the obvious skeleton of a creature lying in the middle of a valley, surrounded by snow-capped mountains. Initial estimates put the animal at being anywhere between 12 and 20 feet. Looking closely, the animal seems to have front and rear legs, a kind of fishy body, and the general structure of a dinosaur or prehistoric reptile. We know dinosaurs used to live on the continent millions of years ago, but how such a fresh corpse could have appeared doesn't make much sense. The only dinosaurs ever found in Antarctica were already fossils. What we could be dealing with here is the dead body of a seal that got stuck inland because of moving ice, then gradually became a skeleton. There's honestly no way of knowing what the creature could be, though we can say with a pretty high degree of certainty that it's real. There are also rumors that as the ice melts from Antarctica, more and more secrets of the ancient world will be revealed, and maybe this strange creature is one of them. The Ancient Magician. In Iran, archaeologists have allegedly discovered the tomb of a great Slavic magician named Jaromir, who lived 12,000 years before today. According to Russian news channels, construction workers were about to build some houses when they came upon an underground mausoleum in Kurdistan that contained 3 coffins. As digging continued, they found the remains of an ancient lost city. Inside one of the coffins was an incredibly well-preserved mummy buried with a handful of luxurious artifacts. The news of this ancient magician did not really reach Western media sites, and while the Russian press said that the lost city and the mausoleum dated back to between 10,000 and 12,000 years ago, Iranian authorities corrected the date, saying the ruins were 850 years old. There was some video footage that was released of the alleged discovery, and the spooky images are quite strange. While some assume the incredibly well-preserved body of the man inside the sarcophagus was an ancient magician, others say he is actually a sleeping Anunnaki stuck in stasis. This is a pretty strange discovery, especially since it hasn't been reported by any major news outlets or legit archaeological websites. But photos have surfaced of what appears to be some kind of almost magically preserved body lying inside of a coffin, dressed in some pretty impressive jewelry and a golden crown. Whether 850 or 12,000 years old, the body looks as though it hasn't decayed for a single second. There was no sign of advanced technology inside the tomb, nothing that would reveal how a body, especially one that hasn't been mummified, could remain so perfect for eons. And yet, here we are. If you're not sure what an Anunnaki is, the Anunnaki are said to be a race of superior beings like gods, that some say came down from space to teach our ancestors how to build pyramids, how to create a written language, and so much more. It's also been said that the Anunnaki bred with primitive humans to create humankind as we know it today. You know, if you're a fan of ancient aliens, that if this mysterious magician really is a hibernating Anunnaki, it makes sense that the discovery was immediately covered up, the body removed, and only a handful of obscure photos and videos uploaded online. At least that is the most exciting theory that is floating around, and there is really not much more to go on. London skeletons. An extremely creepy discovery was recently made underneath Liverpool Street in the English capital of London. It's been called the Bedlam burial ground, and so far, archaeologists have pulled about 3,000 skeletons out of the dirt. It's one of the biggest ancient cemeteries anywhere in England, and it was hiding in plain sight underneath a main street. People were literally walking over these remains for hundreds of years with absolutely no idea. But how did this happen? How could a massive graveyard go unnoticed? It goes back to 1569 when the first people were buried here. Many of them were victims of the Black Death. The burial ground continued to be used all the way up until 1738. Archaeologists say this was one of the most important times in London history, as it spanned the period between London being a Tudor period city to a modern cosmopolitan. Somewhere along the way, the graveyard was forgotten, covered up, and paved over with a street. Even more amazing is that according to the BBC, archaeologists also found evidence that a Roman road runs underneath the cemetery, dating back 2,000 years. The archaeological history here is richer than anyone could have anticipated. The area was likely once part of a marsh that the Romans built a road through. After the archaeologists finish digging up every last skeleton, they will try to find whatever Roman remains they can find underneath. Ancient hallucinogens. Ancient hallucinogens used by a shaman 1,000 years ago in creepy religious rituals were just found hidden inside of a ritual container. The ritual pouch itself is also pretty creepy, seeing as it was crafted from fox snouts that were stitched together. According to National Geographic, the container held the earliest evidence of ayahuasca being prepared for ritualistic use. Ayahuasca is a psychoactive plant still prepared today by the indigenous people of the Amazon basin to give the consumer an extremely potent hallucinogenic experience. It's basically like LSD on steroids. Ayahuasca takes very special preparation, and it's been used by shamans for thousands of years. Jose Capriles, an anthropologist from Penn State University involved with the study, says the pouch probably belonged to a shaman from southwestern Bolivia. It was discovered at an archaeological dig in Cueva del Chileno, an ancient rock shelter used by humans for at least 4,000 years. It was also used at some point as a tomb, though whoever was buried inside was looted far before archaeologists ever showed up. They left behind nothing except what they thought was garbage. The garbage including colorful beads, a few braids of human hair, and the ritual pouch. So what exactly was inside the pouch? How did archaeologists know? They had to analyze the small traces of residue left over inside. They found traces of cocaine, DMT, and psilocin. These are some of the wildest substances a person can ingest, and they were likely all mixed together to create the powerful ayahuasca concoction. The destruction comet. Did a comet hit the Earth and change human civilization? Scientists seem to think so. They say that a comet may have smashed into the surface of our planet 13,000 years ago, drastically altering our entire history. To be more specific, they believe it was a cluster of comet shards which hit the planet in what may have been the most catastrophic event since 66 million years earlier, when the asteroid killed all the dinosaurs. The study was led by Martin Sweatman, a scientist with the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. He says that even though the first Homo sapiens appeared somewhere between 200,000 and 300,000 years ago, the impact of the comet propelled us into the future by reorganizing the way human societies functioned. The scientists believe the fragments of the comet hit North America and Greenland based on the discovery of platinum and nano diamonds found at impact sites, which were likely the result of the comet pieces hitting the ground in balls of fire. The research team also says that they believe the crash of the comet was memorialized at Göbekli Tepe in modern-day Turkey, the first temple ever built in the world. This ancient religious site is linked to the origin of civilization. The massive megalith was made by Stone Age masons thousands of years ago, but why Neolithic people would come here to gather at this site has been a mystery. The theory is that the comet caused such devastation that humans were forced to change from a nomadic lifestyle to farming, and from there cities began to be built. Perhaps civilization began with a bang. Porpoise grave. There is a mysterious grave on the small island of Chapelle d'Amheux in Guernsey, which is a British Crown dependency between England and France. But the grave isn't a normal one. It's not a human buried here. Instead, the grave was discovered to contain the bones of a porpoise. But why was this sea creature given a formal burial 600 years ago? Nobody really knows why. Archaeologists believe the sea creature was butchered and then preserved underground, but the reason eludes them. Radiocarbon dating by a lab in Florida has put the date of the porpoise burial between 1416 and 1490. It's possible that the animal was supposed to be eaten, but whoever put it in the ground forgot to dig it up later. Another theory is that the Christian monks who lived on the island buried the porpoise as a sign of respect, though this doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Maybe they made friends with it? It's true that there are records of the people of Guernsey eating porpoise between the 13th and 14th century, but unfortunately, we'll probably never know if this poor animal was meant to be food or buried as some kind of bizarre ritual. The Meta Romuli. The Meta Romuli is a lost Roman pyramid. It's also called the Piramide Vaticana, and it was built by the Romans as part of a fad that swept the empire during the reign of Caesar Augustus in the First Imperial Age. The Romans were constructing pyramid monuments as burial tombs for the social elite, and archaeologists believe they stole the idea either from Egypt or the Kingdom of Meroe in Sudan. They could have gotten the idea after attacking the Kingdom of Meroe back in 23 BC. The Meta Romuli was first mentioned in the 5th century AD by the writer Hellenius Acron. It was a popular belief that the pyramid held the remains of the legendary founders of Rome, Romulus and Remus. But the pyramid was also associated with St. Peter's martyrdom, and was even visited by pilgrims on their way to St. Peter's Basilica. Even 1,500 years ago, the people of Rome weren't really sure what the pyramid was for. It was just kind of there. But then, in 1498, Pope Alexander VI ordered the pyramid to be destroyed to make way for a road that would connect the Vatican to a bridge that would cross the nearby river. This piece of history was then lost until 1948, when the foundations of the Meta Romuli were rediscovered in Rome, though archaeologists still can't figure out what it was used for in the first place, or who may have been buried under the mysterious monument. Cursed sarcophagi. A shocking trove of over 50 cursed sarcophagi have been found in Egypt in the temple of an ancient queen. This is one of the creepiest recent discoveries to come out of Egypt. Excavations have not only revealed the terrifying wooden sarcophagi, but also texts from what archaeologists are calling the Book of the Dead. This incredible treasure trove was found in the ancient site of Saqqara by Egyptologist Zahi Hawass and his team. They found a total of 52 mummies, all dating back to the New Kingdom of Egypt, between the 16th and 11th century BC. The coffins were inside of burial shafts roughly 40 feet underground, and are incredibly well preserved for being painted thousands of years ago. Hawass and his team were extremely excited because they were able to locate the funerary temple of Queen Nert, found near her husband's burial pyramid. She was married to King Teti, who ruled ancient Egypt for about 12 years and then was brutally murdered in 2291 BC. This is a lot of ancient history that is only now being discovered about Egypt, as before these incredible monuments were found, experts weren't even aware of Queen Nert, and now it turns out she may have been a very important figure in Egyptian history. Archaeologists are now working to see how she fits into the grand scheme of things. As for the Book of the Dead, it is a piece of papyrus about 13 feet long, containing explicit instructions on how to help the dead navigate the underworld. Superstitious people believe that uncovering this many coffins at one time may unleash the famous pharaoh's curse that may cause bad luck, illness, or even death. Murder weapons. A woman recently made a terrifying discovery in her very own house. She realized one day that the wooden panel in front of her oven was broken. She took the panel off and discovered a hole hidden in her wall. Inside the hole was a metallic briefcase, and inside the briefcase was some very disturbing stuff. She found a pink metal bar, knives, skewers, and a weird two-pronged fork. It kind of seemed like a barbecue toolkit that may have been left behind by the old owner of the house. However, it may have actually been a standard-issue torture box. The woman is now terrified that a murderer or serial killer possibly lived in her house and had been torturing people, and then before they left, they stashed their torture equipment in a hole in the wall and covered it up. Things got crazier still. Just a few days after the first discovery, the woman was cleaning her sink when she noticed yet another mysterious hiding place. This one was filled with adult toys, leading to even more bizarre questions. And finally, she discovered multiple pages full of usernames hidden behind the toilet in her bathroom. All clues point to some kind of crazy Craigslist killer that used to live there, though for now, all the poor woman can do is pray he or she doesn't come back for the stuff he left behind. Thracian sacrifices. The skeletal remains of a trio of children were recently found in southwest Bulgaria, the victims of an ancient Thracian sacrifice ritual back during the 6th century BC. This creepy discovery was made by archaeologists working with the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. They were excavating an ancient highway that ran through the area when they found 20 ritual pits on top of a Neolithic city that dates back 8,000 years. These sacrificed children were found inside one of the pits. Along with the children, archaeologists found stones that were probably used as part of the ritual, placed inside of the pit with the dead children as offerings to whichever gods the ancient Thracians worshipped. As for the settlement, it's unclear who lived in it. It was occupied at around 5,800 BC. Bulgarian archaeologists found tools and ceramic vessels along with some primitive buildings that were built with clay. They also found evidence that the settlement was burned down on purpose, though this probably doesn't relate to the mysterious sacrifice of the 3 children. They still don't know why the unfortunate kids were offered up as sacrifice. Brain surgery. Archaeologists investigating a skull found in a Spanish cave have discovered evidence of a failed brain surgery. This skull belonged to an adult woman from the Stone Age, somewhere around 4,800 BC. It was discovered inside the Dehesia cave along with a secondary skull, which probably belonged to a man. To make matters even creepier, the 2 skulls were found with the remains of a dead goat. Archaeologists don't exactly know what happened here. The discovery was pretty morbid and suggestive of some kind of religious ritual. But what makes things so strange is that the woman's skull had a depression that showed signs of healing. In other words, somebody had drilled into the woman's skull to try and gain access to her brain. Then afterwards, she had healed from the surgery. It's possible that the Stone Age people believed there was an evil spirit inside the woman making her sick, and the only way to get it out was to drill a hole in her head. However, the surgery didn't go as planned. They didn't manage to drill all the way to her brain. The woman lived for years after the procedure, though for whatever unknown reason, she was brought to the cave after her death along with the dead man and the goat. Archaeologists also found cut markings that indicated her head was removed from her body immediately after death. As for why this happened, the experts are clueless. Biblical mystery. The Philistines are arguably one of the most mysterious groups of people mentioned in the Hebrew Bible. The most famous stories are perhaps that of David and the Philistine giant Goliath, as well as Samson and the Philistine Delilah. For many years, historians and archaeologists have been trying to figure out who the Philistines were and where did they come from. In 2016, archaeologists finally discovered the first known Philistine cemetery. It was located in Israel outside the walls of Ashkelon, an ancient Philistine city that lasted from the 12th to the 7th centuries BC. Containing more than 211 burials, National Geographic reported that the graves are giving archaeologists an opportunity to investigate the origins of the Philistines and their assimilation into local culture. Before this, their remains were so rare that archaeologists started to joke that maybe they were all buried at sea. That's why they couldn't find any. Until this landmark discovery was made, researchers had little to go on in terms of understanding the Philistines' burial practices and roots. The Bible paints the civilization out as a villainous, uncircumcised group that continuously warred with their Israelite neighbors. Artifacts reveal that the Philistines were much different from other local cultures of the time. They consumed pork and adhered to Aegean and Greek customs rather than Semitic practices. DNA analysis now shows that they actually descended from a group of seafaring Europeans, perhaps from Iberia or Greece, that arrived to Israel 3,000 years ago. Their pottery, architecture, and burial customs were quite different from everyone else. Their people were buried with very few grave goods. Some had a couple of pieces of pottery and very rarely pieces of jewelry. This one was found with some artifact on its face, which could have been some sort of eyepiece or something that was placed there after death. Some believe the Philistines were among the so-called Sea Peoples, a tribal confederation that terrorized the Mediterranean during the late Bronze Age. But the mysteries of their identity and their homeland endure, with researchers hoping that the recently discovered burial sheds some light on their many unanswered questions. Strange Cemetery. During a routine excavation in the Leith Port area of Edinburgh, Scotland, archaeologists got quite the shock when they found a medieval cemetery filled with the remains of hundreds of people. It was just a normal day in anticipation of a planned public transportation line in 2008, but it turned into a much bigger dig. There are no known records of anyone being buried at the site since the street it sits along was built in 1790. Consequently, the transportation project came to a screeching halt while experts dug deeper. They unearthed over 380 burials altogether, with the oldest dating as far back as the 14th century. The newest graves date back to the time of the cemetery's closure, around 1650. Since then, plans for the tram extension were reinstated and excavations resumed. Another 359 skeletons were found after COVID-19 restrictions were lifted last year, bringing the total number of bodies discovered at the site to over 750. The graveyard constitutes one of the largest burials from its time period ever found in Scotland, as well as the largest collection of skeletons in Edinburgh. The next step is for researchers to analyze the skeletons in hopes of learning more about who the deceased individuals were and what their lives were like. One separate, isolated grave found beneath the other graves, who appears to be a female, was found in a pit measuring 33 feet across and 10 to 13 feet deep. She was buried in a crouching position and facing in a different direction than the traditional Christian burials. Why? No clue. The grave likely predates the rest of the cemetery's burials, and it seems to have nothing in common with any medieval features at the site or nearby. But experts are unsure how old the burial is or the circumstances of the woman's life or death. They hope to learn more through radiocarbon dating and isotopic analysis. Medici Mystery. Born in 1498 as Ludovico de' Medici, Giovanni dalle Bandenere was a Medici warrior who was exiled from Florence at just 12 years old for committing a murder. He went on to establish a fierce reputation for his violent spirit, which made him a skilled 16th century mercenary and military captain. The Medici popes Leo X and Clement VII hired him to fight for them, and he became quite famous during his day, believed to be practically invincible. However, in 1526, a cannonball struck Giovanni, requiring the amputation of his right leg above the knee. He reportedly died shortly after surgery, possibly from gangrene. In 2013, the man's remains were exhumed from his burial at Medici chapels in Florence. His femur was intact, with only the lower leg and foot removed, telling a seemingly different story than what's on record. But what that story is, or might be, has yet to be determined. Describing Giovanni as a vigorous man, measuring about 5 feet 8 inches tall, investigation leader paleopathologist Gino Fornaciari explained that the man's bones bore clear evidence of carrying heavy armor and riding horses dating back to his teenage years. Fornaciari added that experts hope to clarify the nature of Giovanni's wounds and what type of surgery he had. Tel Kadesh horde. Sometime during the late 2nd century BC, or 2,600 years ago, someone buried a collection of personal belongings at the archaeological site of Tel Kadesh, along the modern-day Israel-Lebanon border. The items include a terracotta figurine of the god Eros, better known as Cupid, as well as 23 glass game pieces, a pair of metal writing instruments, and a hairpin made from bone. These objects all showed skilled craftsmanship, and their personal nature captured archaeologists' attention. They were mostly in good condition, indicating that they had been deliberately buried together. Game pieces from the ancient world are very unique. Archaeologist Ari Ehrlich sought to understand how and why the artifacts ended up buried together. He points out that while it was customary to find a few ancient game pieces here and there, it was highly unusual to come across 23 of them at once. Ehrlich explained that the only imaginable scenario where it would make sense would be with the burial of a child or adolescent, where game pieces may have been given as funerary offerings. Archaeologist Adi found a poem about a young woman named Hippa, who buried some items as part of a pre-wedding ritual. The poem's author, known only as Antipater, had a rather common name for the time, but there are records of a poet by this name who lived near where the Tel Kadesh hoard was discovered, suggesting that whoever buried the objects might have done so for the same reasons that Hippa did. Perhaps it was some sort of tradition before marriage. Get married and the games are over. It's highly unlikely that experts will ever know for sure why someone buried the hoard of trinkets, but this seems the most likely. Moche ruins. In 2018, archaeologists announced the discovery of many ruins and artifacts that the cryptic Moche culture left behind. Found at the Huaca Limón de Ucupe site in northern Peru's Lambayeque region, it dates back some 1,500 years. The ruins consist of 5 raised pyramid-like adobe structures and 2 chambers, one which was used for meetings and the other that was used as a banquet hall. The hall is decorated with large murals measuring as high as 32 feet, featuring sea lions, fish, and other marine creatures. There are 2 thrones that face one another, one which a ruler would have sat on, while the other, lower seat, would have been used for making offerings. The building was clearly intended for ceremonial gatherings among Moche nobility, according to Chief Archaeologist Walter Alba, who spoke with National Geographic. Its discovery constitutes the first physical evidence of these events actually happening, whereas before, they were only seen in the culture's artwork. For unknown reasons, the structure was ultimately partially disassembled, concealed, and then abandoned. The Moche civilization's collapse around 700 AD is also a mystery. Some experts believe that El Niño brought severe flooding from the nearby river, and that the extreme weather played a role in the society's collapse. But what really happened remains a mystery. And now for a little-known culture that you've probably never heard of. But first, I want to give a big shout out to Nayem Abid and Erica Russell. You guys are awesome, and thanks so much for supporting this channel. If you are new here, be sure to hit that subscribe button and join the Origins Explained family. The Promontory culture. During the 1930s, a young anthropologist was exploring the north shore of Utah's Great Salt Lake when he found some curious artifacts in some caves. He carefully cataloged hundreds of moccasins, moccasin parts, bison bone, pottery, arrows, stone tools, and all kinds of things, and then sent them to the University of Utah. Then came the Great Depression as well as World War II, so the mysterious moccasin sat forgotten. But now, archaeologists are on the trail of this little-known ancient culture, now known as the Promontory culture, after the caves the artifacts were found in. Archaeologists have gone back to the caves to better understand who lived here. The staggering amount of moccasins is extremely rare, since most of these types of items disintegrate over time. The style of these shoes was just like those from the Canadian subarctic, so finding them in caves in Utah is a little out of place. They were unlike the moccasins of nearby groups and closely resembled those worn by the Dene people, who lived much further north. This suggests that the Promontory caves inhabitants were Dene ancestors, according to geochemical archaeologist Dr. Jessica Metcalf. The team studied over 200 pieces of footwear from the caves, with 82% of the shoes worn by children 12 and under. Researchers examined chemical traces in the shoes to reconstruct the movement of the people who wore them. An isotope analysis of an ankle strap revealed that the people who had lived in the caves had subarctic Dene roots, and that they traveled pretty far south of the Great Salt Lake, perhaps into the American Southwest, where Dene-speaking populations still exist today. The conclusion so far is that it appears as though Dene connections go back much further than scientists originally thought, with long-distance migrations starting many centuries ago. The city of Ur. Famously mentioned in the Bible as the place where Abraham fled to from Canaan, the ancient Sumerian city-state of Ur was thought to be a mythical place. But once again, it turned out to be real. In fact, it flourished as a prosperous trade center even before it was mentioned in scripture. Founded around 3800 BC in what is now Iraq, the powerful Persian Gulf port city was home to as many as 80,000 residents at its peak. Ur was continuously inhabited until around 450 BC, when changing temperatures and drought prompted the population to abandon the site and migrate northward toward more fertile territory. An Italian explorer rediscovered Ur in 1625, when he traveled through the area and found bricks and other artifacts bearing strange inscriptions. At the time, the city's ruins were buried beneath the sand. British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley excavated the site in 1922 and found that what's left of Ur is largely reduced to rubble. I mean, it was around a really long time ago. The city's most visible surviving remnant is a partially restored ziggurat that was unearthed during the 1930s. Originally constructed during the 21st century BC, the structure was rebuilt by Babylon's final king, Nabonidus, during the 6th century BC. Over the centuries, the coastline has changed, and Ur's few surviving remnants sit much further inland compared to the city's location during its heyday, when it was situated near the coast and the mouth of the Euphrates River. The ruins are helping archaeologists gain a better understanding of the culture, but their knowledge is admittedly limited to what's available at the site, and the once powerful city of Ur remains an enigma. Neolithic stone balls. Hundreds of carved stone balls dating as far back as 5,000 years have been found throughout Scotland and other parts of Europe. Their appearance varies, with some featuring intricate patterns and others bearing carved knobs, pyramids, and other designs. Most of the balls are similar in size, measuring roughly 2.75 inches in diameter. Experts haven't been able to figure out these Neolithic artifacts, but they're determined to try. The National Museum of Scotland recently announced that its researchers are trying to get to the bottom of the mystery through virtual technology by poring through hundreds of documents relating to discoveries of the stone balls, and by searching for missing and undiscovered artifacts. Unfortunately, experts have limited data to work with. For example, while they know that many of the stone balls were found near Aberdeen, they do not know the exact locations of the discoveries. Additionally, some people who found these objects in the past likely underestimated their historical value, meaning there are probably some stone balls in the possession of families whose original owners overlooked their worth. Dr. Hugo Anderson Weimark, who is heading the research, told the Herald that the team is trying to track down a few lost stone balls that are known to exist, including one that was last seen in 1986 and another that went missing in 1908. So if you see something, let us know. He says there are probably a few others that got lost because people didn't know what they were or that they were important. The most recently discovered stone ball was found among a collection of flint tools in 2018. Anderson and his team hope that more will surface as their investigation unfolds, and reminded the public that Scottish law requires people to report archaeological discoveries, even if it's just a ball. James Ossuary. The James Ossuary is a limestone box made to hold bones that was made known to the public in 2002. Ossuaries were very common in Israel from around the 2nd century BC until the fall of Jerusalem in 70 AD. But this one was special because it features an Aramaic inscription stating James, son of Joseph, brother of Jesus. If the box's contents are what the carving claims, it means they represent the earliest known written mention of Jesus Christ, and the first known archaeological evidence of him, period. For historians and Christians alike, the discovery would be of major significance. But ever since the report was released, the James ossuary has remained shrouded in controversy, including claims that the box itself is a genuine artifact, but that its inscription is a forgery. In the so-called forgery trial of the century, the ossuary's owner, Oded Golan, faced accusations that the carving was fake. 4 others were also accused of participating in the alleged scam. Golan and his co-defendants were acquitted in 2012, but not everyone is convinced of his innocence. In the years since, experts and critics have revisited arguments supporting and denying the ossuary's authenticity. It's hard to prove or disprove claims of forgery since the artifact's origins are only traceable to a certain point, when it was purchased from an antique dealer. The Israel Antiquities Authority has made its mind up and believes the ossuary is fake, but some scholars have pointed out that the entire IAA panel consisted of members who were openly outspoken against any arguments in the ossuary's favor. As with most biblical discoveries, this artifact has led to much heated debate. So the question remains, is it real? Is it not? Who knows? Headless statues. While conducting a routine excavation ahead of a building project east of Athens, archaeologists recently discovered headless marble statues of a woman and her servant in an ancient Greek cemetery. Dating back to the 4th century BC, the statues depict the woman seated in an elaborate chair, with a female servant standing beside her. The sculpture likely marked the woman's burial sometime before 317 BC, when the Athenian governor Demetrius of Phaleron outlawed the lavish grave markers. Grave monuments like this were common at the time, and often featured people with their servants. In addition to not knowing who the women were, experts are unsure why their heads are missing. It's likely that the heads were accurate depictions of the people they represent, as it was customary in ancient Greece to mark graves with idealized faces. Excavations are ongoing, and the statue was transported to the Archaeological Museum of Vrana for safekeeping. Archaeologists are constantly finding more fragments and artifacts at the site, so we just have to wait and see what else they find. City in the desert. Petra is one of the most magical places in the world, full of hidden secrets, and for centuries it was lost to the Western world. The city carved into the rock dates back thousands of years and was inhabited as early as 7000 BC. The city is made up of hundreds of houses, tombs, temples, obelisks, you name it. Even today, only 15% of the city has been uncovered, with the rest still hidden underground. Petra was once inhabited by the Nabateans, going back to the 2nd century BC. Very little is known about them or their society, but at some point when the Nabateans migrated to Petra, they became extremely wealthy and the city flourished. These people were so famous they were mentioned by many different civilizations, including the Greeks, Chinese, and Romans. Petra's inhabitants were used to living in the harsh desert climate and were great at harvesting rainwater and growing crops. When enemies came, they would disappear into the surrounding mountains. According to ancient origins, the Nabateans built their structures with the idea of secrecy in mind, so that few would realize the purpose and function of the structures. This protected the Nabatean water supply from invaders and strangers. Records show that many cultures were impressed by their ability to control water in the middle of the barren desert, and were well known for their agricultural abilities, as well as knowledge in engineering, astronomy, the arts, and building. They expanded trade routes, creating over 2,000 sites across all of the Middle East. The most famous temple, known as the Al-Khazna structure, was built during the 1st century AD, during which time the city's population peaked at around 20,000 residents. These ornate buildings seem out of place in the middle of the desert, where survival was difficult. Eventually, in 106 AD, Petra fell to the Romans after being a client state of the empire since the 1st century BC. The city's importance declined with the emergence of sea routes, and in 363 AD, an earthquake destroyed many of its buildings. After centuries of continuous decline, Petra was abandoned in the 12th century. It was forgotten about by the rest of the world until 1812, when a Swiss explorer named Johann Ludwig Burckhardt accidentally found the city while traveling across the African continent looking for the source of the Niger River. He was the first European to see this city since the Crusaders hundreds of years before. The locals kept it a closely guarded secret, but Burckhardt wrote about the rock-cut tombs in his journal, and word got out about this lost city carved into the rocks full of possible treasures. Sadly, Petra's rediscovery led to considerable looting. Already damaged by age and the elements, the buildings fell further into disrepair until excavations and preservation efforts began in recent decades. Archaeologists are hoping to learn more about the mysterious Nabateans as they work to excavate the rest of the city. Richard III's remains. King Richard III's short-lived reign from 1483 until his death in 1485 was full of controversy. He took leadership by force, stealing the crown from his nephews and eventually ordering their execution. The villainous ruler also had his own wife and brother killed and became one of England's most hated monarchs of all time. Even Shakespeare made his disdain for Richard III known by portraying the king as a deformed hunchback, as a physical manifestation of the man's depraved mind. Richard III died in battle from 2 fatal blows to the back of his head. According to legend, his body was dumped into the River Soar. But actually, the truth is much more surprising. Under a parking lot in Leicester, archaeologists found the remains of the king. He had been buried near a church that no longer existed, and his grave had been forgotten about after the friary's dissolution and demolition in 1538. The age of the remains at death matched with Richard's age when he was killed, and a mitochondrial DNA analysis proved that the bones belonged to him. An examination showed that the disgraced king was suffering from a roundworm infection when he died. In keeping with the agreement to rebury the remains if they were found, Richard's body was laid to rest at Leicester Cathedral in 2015, following a funeral service. Long missing couple. One day in 1942, Marcelin Dumoulin and his wife Francine reportedly set off on foot to feed their animals in the Swiss Alps. They never returned to their home in the village of Saviès, and their 7 children were left to wonder what could have possibly happened to them. Custody of the kids was divided among several local families, and they had no choice but to move on with their lives. The couple's bodies were finally found in 2017, wedged into the crack of an alpine glacier 8,580 feet above sea level. A ski lift worker made the alarming discovery of what he initially thought were 2 black rocks, only to take a closer look and realize that he'd encountered a pair of human corpses. The bodies wore clothing characteristic of the period when the Dumoulins disappeared, offering newfound hope that the couple had finally been found. DNA testing confirmed that the remains belonged to the Dumoulins, who had only 2 surviving children by then. The findings also brought closure to the village, who had wondered about the couple's fate for the better part of a century. An ancient well. Colin Steer from England had wondered about a dip in the living room floor of his home for years. When he retired in 2012, he finally decided to investigate. With a friend's help, he spent 3 days digging a 17-foot deep hole and found a medieval well dating back to the 16th century. Measuring 33 feet deep, the well was built by Sir Francis Drake for transporting water from Dartmoor to Plymouth, but had been covered up in 1895. Inside the well, Steer discovered a 16th century peasant sword. He installed lights inside the structure and built a trapdoor over it. The well is now the focal point of the man's living room and a famous topic of conversation among the neighbors. Would you want to have an old well in your living room? Let me know in the comments below. Steer's wife had discouraged him from exploring beneath their sagging floor years earlier, when they had 3 young children in the house. He had initially theorized that the unusual spot was a sinkhole, or had a body buried beneath it. Either one is not great for kids. Earlier this year, nearly a decade after he first started digging, Steer found a coin from 1725 in the well. He plans to continue digging in hopes of finding more artifacts. That'll keep him busy in retirement. A whale in Vermont. While building a railroad in the small town of Charlotte, Vermont back in 1849, a construction crew unearthed a beluga whale skeleton. The discovery immediately raised the question of how the remains of a marine creature turned up in a farmer's field 200 miles from the nearest ocean. Known as the Charlotte whale, it's one of several whale carcasses that have been found in the landlocked state of Vermont. At a lack of other explanations, some people attributed discoveries like these to Noah's flood. But there is a more scientific explanation to this mystery based on the theory of glaciation and ice ages, which Swiss geologist and biologist Louis Agassiz had developed roughly a decade before the Charlotte whale was discovered. Between 12,500 and 10,000 years ago, the modern-day Champlain Valley was submerged by a prehistoric body of water called the Champlain Sea. The melting glaciers that formed the lake had pushed the ground below sea level under their enormous weight. Over the next several thousand years, the land gradually rose to its current level, ending the Champlain Sea's existence. Thought to be an adult, the Charlotte whale measures roughly 12 feet long. Its gender is unknown. Although radiocarbon dating is impossible due to the preservation techniques that were originally used on the bones, scientists believe the whale lived between 11,500 and 11,000 years ago. Neolithic buildings. In 2012, workers were astonished to find the remains of a prehistoric building at the planned site of a new housing complex in Monmouth, Wales. Measuring at least 50 feet long, the foundations of what appear to be a meeting house date back an estimated 6,500 years, possibly making them older than the Egyptian pyramids. Nothing like it had ever been found in Britain. Made with 3-foot-wide tree trunks, the structure likely sat next to an ancient lake that no longer exists. Speaking with the Daily Mail, archaeologist Steve Clark admitted that the building may date back to the Bronze Age, but that the team believed it was much older, perhaps from as far back as the early Neolithic era. He also conceded that they were unsure what the structure was used for, but that it probably housed a family and may have functioned as a gathering place. Another impressively old discovery was made in Monmouth in 2015, when archaeologists identified a building called a crannog, which was elevated on poles over a lake that dried up during the first millennium BC. Dating back to the Neolithic age, the nearly 5,000-year-old structure was built before the advent of metalworking. Crannogs are thought to represent symbols of power and status among the area's Stone Age populations. The one found here was built atop a prehistoric burnt mound of discarded stones and pebbles that were heated and dropped into pots to boil water. The presence of at least 4 burnt mounds in different layers of the site indicates that the settlement was successively inhabited for hundreds or thousands of years, according to Clark. Once covering nearly the entire modern-day town of Monmouth, the prehistoric lake formed around 11,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. The people who lived alongside it built boats and may have used it to access the sea and travel across the English Channel to northern Europe. Mayan murals. Lucas Acicona Ramirez, who lives in the Guatemalan village of Chahul, decided to renovate his home in 2003. As he chipped away at the outer layer of plaster on the walls, he uncovered a brightly colored mural. Turns out that hiding behind his walls was a vivid Maya mural. The artwork depicts figures wearing a mix of Spanish and traditional Maya clothing and engaging in what appears to be some type of ceremony. Suspecting that he had found something of historical significance, Ramirez contacted a local archaeologist, who passed news of the discovery on to other experts at a university in Poland. Archaeologists said that the images are difficult to interpret due to the mix of European and indigenous clothing. They said that it looks as though the figures are dancing and carrying something in their hands. Although the team believes these objects might be human hearts, they don't know for sure. After being exposed to air for the first time in centuries, the murals have faded significantly. Consequently, the team had to race against the clock to study them and verify information that Ramirez provided them with, a difficult task in a country where many documents were destroyed in recent decades due to warfare. Guatemala is home to the largest surviving Maya population, and experts believe there are more wall murals waiting to be discovered. The artwork found in Ramirez's kitchen represents a unique blend of pre-Columbian and European colonial elements that is not seen in most other Maya paintings. A queen's hairpin. While excavating a communal toilet at the Fontainebleau Palace outside Paris in 2012, archaeologists found a hairpin among the ancient sewage. The 3.5-inch long gold piece featured interlocking C's and a green and white finish, which are the design and colors of the 16th century French queen, Catherine de' Medici. Famous across Europe for her lavish jewelry, Catherine was Queen of France from 1547 to 1559. Very few pieces from her extensive jewelry collection have ever been found, making the discovery especially significant. It's unusual that the hairpin was found in a communal toilet, which Catherine would not have used. The artifact may have been stolen and dropped into the latrine, either by accident or by someone wanting to get rid of the evidence. Archaeologists admitted that they can do little more than speculate about why and how the royal piece of jewelry appeared in such an unroyal place. A boat in the desert. In 2016, a well-preserved wooden boat was found buried in the ancient Egyptian necropolis of Abu Sir. Discovered in the tomb of a high-ranking official, The 4,500-year-old vessel's planks and ropes were still intact, making it one of few Egyptian boats ever found in decent condition. Made from expensive cedar and measuring 60 feet long, the boat is unusually large and lavish for the burial of a non-royal member of society. But an even bigger question is, what was it doing in the middle of the desert? For one, Abu Sir is situated near the Nile River, which the Egyptians made great use of for transporting goods and people. Boats became increasingly important throughout the 4th dynasty for their role in international trade and were symbols of state power, according to Douglas Inglis of Texas A&M University. Boat burials were fairly common at certain points during Egypt's Old Kingdom period. It's unknown whether the vessel found at Abu Sir was actually used for sailing. Experts don't know how exactly why the Egyptians practiced boat burials, but they believe that the watercrafts may have been built to serve the deceased in the afterlife, or during their owner's journey to the underworld. Persian cup in Siberia. While monitoring the melting permafrost on Siberia's Ningen Peninsula in 2016, a team of scientists discovered a fragment of a medieval bronze cup that came from what is now Iran. Speaking with the Siberian Times, researcher Andrei Gusev said that Iranian artifacts from the Middle Ages had been found in western Siberia, but never this far north, let alone beyond the Arctic Circle. Along with the cup, the team unearthed a ceramic pot and a bronze knife handle. Researchers believe that the cup was made sometime during the 10th or 11th century and brought to Siberia around 200 years later. Found roughly 2,300 miles from where it was manufactured, the artifact is a testament to the vast trade networks that existed in a world that, to us, seems much smaller in the absence of modern technology. Asian merchants appeared in the Upper Kama region of modern-day Russia during the 6th and 7th centuries. The indigenous Khanty and Mansi peoples placed a high value on Persian imports. They assigned ritual meaning to the objects, keeping them in holy places and offering them as gifts to gods and spirits. They also used Persian dishes during festivals to serve ceremonial foods to the gods. It's entirely possible that more of these artifacts will appear as the permafrost melts, reflecting an extremely rare benefit that comes along with the world's changing climate. Thanks for watching! If you'd like to learn about more archaeological discoveries in surprising places, let me know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!